Hello and welcome to Victorian Mysteries, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Tonight, I invite you to step once more into the gaslit streets of London and join me, Dr. John Watson, as I recount a most curious adventure entitled The Murder Beneath the London Bridge. Chapter 1. A Visitor in the Night. Hello and welcome to Victorian Mysteries, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Thus, dear listener, I bid you join me once again at 221B Baker Street, that modest set of rooms in which I was privileged to witness the remarkable workings of the most singular mind I have ever encountered, my friend Sherlock Holmes. It was upon a bitter November evening that the event I am about to recount first intruded upon our quiet lives. The wind that night blew in harsh gusts from the river, rattling the window panes and carrying with it the acrid smell of coal smoke that ever clung to London's winter air. The streets below glistened with rain, and the occasional rattle of a hansom cab upon the slick cobbles echoed against the tall houses of Baker Street. Within, however, all was warmth and tranquility, for Holmes sat cross-legged upon the rug before the hearth, his violin resting idly across his knees while I, settled in my chair with a medical journal spread upon my lap, basked in the comfort of both fire and companionship. For some time we had spoken little. Holmes was in one of those meditative moods that overtook him when no case presented itself. Moods in which his restless mind, starved of stimulation, would seek occupation in the realms of chemistry, music, or abstruse monograph. Yet even in silence, the peculiar intensity of his presence filled the room, so that one could not forget for an instant that here was a man whose thoughts darted with lightning rapidity across matters beyond the grasp of most men. It was at such a moment, with the clock upon the mantel pointing to a quarter before midnight, that there came a sudden violent knocking at the street door below. 3 sharp raps, hurried and insistent, 35 years. His aspect betraying both agitation and exhaustion. His coat was damp from the night mist, his collar awry, and his face pale as though he had stared upon some dreadful vision. He removed his hat with a trembling hand, and when Mrs. Hudson would have offered to relieve him of his wet outer garments, he waved her aside with an impatient motion. "Mr. Holmes," he cried, "forgive the lateness of my call, but I am in desperate need of your assistance. I know not where else to turn." Holmes rose with the courteous composure that never deserted him, and with a gesture bade the man approach the fire. "Pray compose yourself, sir, you are among friends. Permit me first to introduce my companion and colleague, Dr. John Watson, upon whose discretion you may absolutely rely. And now, before you speak, allow me to present the outline of your case, as it already lies before me." The stranger blinked in astonishment, his lips parting as though to protest, but Holmes forestalled him with a lifted hand. "You are, I perceive, a clerk in one of the city's financial houses. You have this night crossed London Bridge on your return, and there you have witnessed a sight so dreadful that you scarce trust your own recollection. The police whom you approached have dismissed your account as fanciful, and so, driven by desperation, you have come hither to Baker Street. Am I correct?" The poor fellow sank into the nearest chair as though his knees would no longer support him. "Good heavens," he gasped. "How could you possibly know that?" Holmes allowed himself the faintest of smiles. "It is my profession to know what others overlook. The smear of ink upon your right cuff proclaims the clerk. The cut of your coat and the modest quality of your boots point to one employed respectably but not lavishly. The wet condition of those same boots, and the peculiar yellow mud adhering to the soles, I recognize as that of the river steps adjoining London Bridge. As for the nature of what you saw, your countenance is that of a man haunted by an apparition of horror, not merely delayed by some commonplace misfortune. Finally, your glance of bitter tomorrow. It was past 11 when at last I quitted, and as my lodgings lie south of the river, I took my accustomed route across London Bridge. The night, as you will recall, was misty, with a fine rain that blurred the lamps into smudges of yellow. Few people were abroad at that hour, and the sound of my own steps echoed dismally against the stone arches. As I reached the center span of the bridge, I paused, for there came to my ears a strange noise, a muffled cry, followed by a splash, as though something heavy had struck the water below. I hurried to the parapet and peered into the darkness. At first I could distinguish nothing, but presently, as the mist shifted, I perceived a shape caught amongst the timbers beneath the arch. A human body, Mr. Holmes, lying half submerged, its face ghastly upturned, the eyes staring as if in mortal terror. I confess that for a moment I stood rooted, unable to credit my senses. Then, recollecting myself, I hastened to the nearest constable and urged him to accompany me. He came somewhat unwillingly, but when we returned, the body was gone. The waters flowed black and silent, and he declared that I must have been the victim of some trick of the light. I protested in vain, but he bade me be off to my bed and think no more of it. Yet, Mr. Holmes, I know what I saw. The image of that face is burned upon my mind. And so, driven by desperation, I have come to you. Pembroke's voice faltered at the end, and he sank back in his chair, his eyes imploring Holmes to believe him. For a moment my friend was silent, his long fingers steepled before him, his gaze fixed upon the dancing flames. At length he spoke, and his words had in them a quiet intensity that told me his mind had already leapt far beyond the mere recital of facts. "Your story, Mr. Pembroke," said he, "is of the most singular interest. That you saw a body, I have no doubt. That it was removed ere the police arrived, I also accept. The river does not so earnestness, and departed to await us upon the morrow." When the door had closed behind him, I turned to Holmes in some perplexity. "Surely, Holmes," said I, "this is but the fancy of an overtired clerk. He himself admits to long hours and weary eyes. Might it not be that he imagined more than he saw?" Holmes shook his head. "No, Watson, the man is no liar. His agitation was genuine, and the coherence of his narrative too exact for mere hallucination. Consider also the psychology. A clerk, modest and unassuming, gains nothing by inventing such a tale. No, my dear fellow, there is more beneath this matter than appears upon the surface. A corpse upon the river, vanished ere the law arrives. Such a circumstance smacks of design, not chance." He returned to his violin, tucking it beneath his chin, and with a few swift strokes drew from it a plaintive air that seemed to echo the troubled mystery now set before us. Long into the night the notes lingered, weaving in my mind strange images of the dark river, the fog-shrouded bridge, and the dreadful face that had so shaken our visitor. At last, wearied, I sought my bed, though sleep was long in coming. For I could not shake the conviction that upon the morrow we should find ourselves embarked upon one of those curious adventures in which the genius of Sherlock Holmes shone with brightest luster. Chapter 2. The Vanished Corpse. The November dawn broke sullen and reluctant, as though the very sun were loath to pierce the heavy pall of fog that lay upon the city. From my window at Baker Street I could scarce distinguish the outlines of the opposite houses, and the rattle of early carts upon the roadway came muffled and indistinct, as if wrapped in cotton. Yet despite the dreariness of the hour, I felt within myself a certain quickening of the spirits, for the strange tale imparted to us by our midnight visitor had fired my imagination. Holmes, too, seemed in high fettle, for when I entered the sitting room I found him already dressed, his keen gray eyes alight with that restless energy which invariably heralded the beginning of a drumming upon his knee, his gaze fixed upon some inner horizon invisible to the rest of us. At length, as the cab clattered onto the bridge itself, he roused from his reverie and tapped sharply upon the roof. "Here, driver, halt!" We alighted in the very center of London Bridge, the broad arches of which spanned the sluggish waters of the Thames. Beneath us, the river rolled black and oily, carrying with it refuse from the warehouses and a faint stench of decay. Barges, their outlines blurred by the fog, loomed like monsters upon the surface, their lanterns casting wavering gleams across the current. Pembroke, visibly shaken, pointed to the spot where he claimed to have seen the body. "There, gentlemen, beneath that arch." It was caught amongst the timbers, its face turned upwards. I shall never forget it. Holmes stepped to the parapet and leaned far over, his eagle eyes scanning every inch of the murky scene. Then, with sudden decision, he turned and beckoned us to follow. "There is a stair," said he, leading down to the water's edge. "We must inspect the place more closely." The stair to which he referred was narrow and slimy, worn by centuries of tide, and so precipitous that I feared Pembroke, in his agitation, might stumble headlong. At the foot lay a small landing, black with damp, from which a man might gain access to the beams and piles supporting the bridge. Here Holmes crouched upon his heels, examining with minute attention the stones and timbers. "Ha!" he exclaimed softly, and pointed with his long forefinger. "Observe, Watson, the dark stain upon this stone. Blood beyond question, though diluted by water, and here, lodged within the crack, a fragment of silk. See how it gleams even in this dim light. Pray place it carefully within your notebook." I did as he directed, marveling as ever at the quickness of his perception. To my untrained eye, the stones bore no mark save the universal slime of the river. Yet Holmes, with one swift glance, had discerned evidence of tragedy. "Remarkable," I murmured. "Not remarkable, Watson, merely observation," returned he with patience. "And what, pray, do you make of this bloodstain, Inspector? Or of this fragment of Turkish silk, torn and lodged in the stone?" Lestrade frowned, peering with doubtful eyes at the evidence. "Could be anything. The river's a dirty place. As for the silk, half the East End's full of foreign trinkets. I say again, there's no case here." "On the contrary," Holmes retorted with sudden energy, "there is here the outline of a most singular crime. We have a body deposited beneath the bridge. We have blood, proving violence, and we have a fragment of silk of foreign manufacture. linking the matter to the river trade. Add to this the fact that the body vanished in the brief interval before our witness returned with the police, and you will admit that some agency, human or otherwise, has intervened. Lestrade shrugged. You'll be chasing shadows, Mr. Holmes. But if you can conjure a corpse out of this fog, I'll be happy to take it into custody. Holmes laughed softly, a sound devoid of mirth. Very well, Inspector. Let us see who proves the conjurer. For the next hour, Holmes examined every inch of the landing and the timbers beneath the bridge. He noted the impressions of boots upon the slime, distinguishing them by subtle differences in tread and size. He traced the faint smear of blood along a beam, showing how the body had been dragged. He even produced a small magnifying lens and scrutinized the fibers of the silk fragment. Watson, do you perceive the peculiarity of this weave? He asked. I confessed my ignorance. It is no English manufacture, he explained, but Turkish, perhaps even Persian. Such fabric is rare in London, confined chiefly to the warehouses of the Eastern merchants. Our investigation, therefore, must lead us thither. Pembroke listened in wonder, his confidence in Holmes growing with every deduction. Then you believe, sir, that the body was not carried away by the tide, but by men? Precisely. And murder beneath London Bridge. The words thrilled me to the core, though I confess they also chilled me. For the notion that such dark deeds might be perpetrated in the very heart of London struck me with dread. Yet in Holmes' eyes there gleamed that fierce joy which only the chase of crime could awaken. When we reached Baker Street once more, he spread the fragment of silk upon the table, bending over it with magnifying glass and tweezers. For an hour he studied its fibers, consulting several volumes upon Oriental textiles from his library. At last he leaned back with a sigh of satisfaction. It is as I thought, said he. This is of Turkish weave, imported but seldom, and chiefly through one or two merchants whose warehouses lie upon the riverfront. We must visit them, Watson, if we are to learn more. Pembroke, who had sat anxiously throughout, clasped his hands. You truly believe, then, that I was no victim of fancy? Holmes laid a hand upon his arm. My dear sir, rest assured that you saw what you believed you saw. And I give you my word, we shall uncover the truth, though it lie hidden in the darkest waters of the Thames. Thus ended the first stage of our inquiry. Already the case of the vanished corpse had spread its tendrils into the web of London's commerce, hinting at connections far wider than any of us yet comprehended. I could not help but feel that we were embarked upon an adventure as perilous as it was extraordinary, and that before its conclusion, we should look upon scenes of both tragedy and triumph, such as even Holmes himself had seldom encountered. Chapter 3. Traces in the Fog. London, when the fog lingers past sunrise, takes on an aspect at once sinister and mournful. The tall chimneys loom like gaunt sentinels, their outlines blurred and monstrous. The river becomes a sheet of dull pewter, upon which barges drift like ghosts, and every sound, from the creak of cartwheels to the call of costermongers, is muffled as though the city itself were wrapped in a winding sheet. It was amidst such conditions that Holmes, Pembroke, and I set forth upon the next stage of our inquiry. The clue upon which Holmes laid chief emphasis was the fragment, "The path leads." Holmes smiled thinly. I foresee nothing, my dear sir. I merely prepare myself for every eventuality. It is the fool who decides too soon. We must not leap from a rag of silk to a gallows. Yet, if I mistake not, there lies in this fragment the faint scent of blood, a blood that will not be washed out, however much its owners may desire. We dismissed the cab upon Lower Thames Street and set out on foot along the riverside. Here the air was rank with the odors of fish, tar, and spices, for the warehouses of the city emptied their goods upon the docks, and men from every nation of the earth might be seen unloading cargo. Sailors shouted in tongues unfamiliar to my ear. Porters staggered beneath bales and casks, and the very stones seemed to tremble with the ceaseless industry of the place. Holmes moved among them with the air of one who sought no man's notice, yet missed no detail. His gaze flicked from the marks upon the crates to the very mud upon the cobbles. More than once he stooped to examine some trifle that to me appeared insignificant. A shred of rope, a dropped match, the impression of a boot heel. At length we came before a warehouse whose facade bore the name Rahman and Company, importers of silks and spices. Holmes paused, his eyes narrowing. This, I think, will serve as a beginning. We entered to find ourselves amidst bales of fabric, the rich hues of the east glowing even through the gloom of the warehouse. A tall, swarthy man of dignified bearing approached, bowing courteously. "Gentlemen, may I be of service?" Holmes, with the utmost politeness, introduced himself and explained that he had interest in the importation of certain fabrics. Producing the scrap of silk, he inquired whether the merchant recognized its origin. The man took it in his long fingers, examining it with an expression that was too carefully controlled to deceive Holmes. "Yes, sir," he said after a pause. "This is indeed of Turkish weave. We import such silks from Smyrna, a fine quality, along the wharves, visiting other houses of trade." In 2 or 3 places Holmes showed the fragment, receiving answers ranging from ignorance to vague recognition. Yet none bore the same air of concealed knowledge as Rahman. As evening fell, the fog thickened once more, wrapping the river in impenetrable gloom. Holmes, with his customary disregard for comfort, led us along a narrow alley that descended towards the water. Here the cobbles were slimy, the air foul, and the flickering of a solitary gas lamp scarcely illumined more than a yard about us. Suddenly Holmes halted, raising his hand. "Hush!" From the darkness below came the sound of a door closing softly, followed by muffled voices. We pressed ourselves into the shadow as 2 men emerged from a doorway, beneath the warehouse. They bore between them a heavy sack which they loaded clumsily into a small boat moored at the steps. The faint creak of oars followed, and the boat glided off into the fog. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Watson, what say you to our vanished corpse?" My heart gave a leap. "You think?" "I think we have witnessed the very means by which our friend's discovery was spirited away. The sack, Watson. There is more in this matter than the loss of a few yards of silk. Murder walks among these docks." Pembroke, pale with horror, clutched my arm. "Good God, Holmes, what are we to do?" "Follow, of course," returned Holmes coolly, "but cautiously. The river will not surrender its secrets easily. Yet it has shown us a glimpse, We must be patient. We trailed the boat as best we could along the bank, though the fog soon swallowed it from view. Holmes, undaunted, marked the direction. They rowed eastward towards the deeper docks. We shall know more soon. For now we have confirmed that there was indeed a body, and that men labor even now to conceal it. That, gentlemen, is progress. We returned to Baker Street late, weary yet exhilarated. Whenever Holmes advanced a theory beyond the commonplace, it was to this worthy that Holmes resolved we must now turn. The discovery of the silk fragment, the furtive conduct of the merchant Rahman, and our nocturnal glimpse of men bearing a sack to a waiting boat, these were, to my mind, proofs enough of some dreadful crime. Yet Holmes, with that peculiar scruple of his, insisted that the matter required the cognizance of Scotland Yard, if only to force their hand when the time came to reveal the full truth. "You see, Watson," he remarked over breakfast the following morning, "if we proceed too far without the Yard, they will cry out that we have meddled with their duty, and any case we build shall crumble upon the rocks of official jealousy. But if we place a crumb before Lestrade, he will either dismiss it, in which case we retain the advantage, or he will follow it, in which case we may direct him as the angler does a trout. Either way, the truth will out." Accordingly, after a hasty repast, we drove to Scotland Yard, Pembroke accompanying us with visible anxiety. The young barrister had passed a sleepless night, haunted by the notion that he had stumbled into some labyrinth of crime from which no exit could be found. His pallor, and the way he started at every sudden noise, bespoke the nervous tension under which he labored. Lestrade received us in his office, a narrow chamber lined with shelves of dusty files, its windows begrimed with the soot of Whitehall. He greeted Holmes with his customary blend of grudging respect and ill-disguised annoyance. "Well, Mr. Holmes, what is it this time? Some trifling matter of a missing umbrella? Or have you solved another mystery the Yard was never aware existed?" Holmes inclined his head. "Neither, Inspector. I come to place before you a case which may touch upon matters of murder and concealment. Mr. Pembroke here has already informed you, I presume, of his discovery beneath London Bridge." Lestrade waved a hand. Yes, a fanciful tale of corpses vanishing into the night. We looked into it, of course. Found nothing. The river is full of rubbish, and the imagination of a young gentleman runs away with him. Fragment of silk. He laid the rag upon Lestrade's desk, which matches the wares of Rahman and Company, and which was found in the very crevice where Mr. Pembroke saw the body. Lestrade picked up the silk, turning it between finger and thumb. "A scrap of cloth. There are thousands like it in the city. Why, it may have been dropped by any porter. This proves nothing, Mr. Holmes, nothing at all." I could not restrain myself. "Come, Lestrade, surely you must see there is more here than mere coincidence. Holmes has traced the silk to a single importer, has observed suspicious activity by night." Lestrade interrupted with a weary sigh. "Dr. Watson, I do not doubt your good faith, nor Mr. Holmes' ingenuity. But the Yard requires evidence that would stand in court. Until you produce a body, or a witness prepared to swear to a crime, I can do nothing. We cannot rouse the river police upon shadows and silks." Holmes' lips twitched in the faintest smile. "And yet, Inspector, the law has often been roused upon less. You are content, then, to wait until the river casts up its burden of proof upon some downstream mud bank?" "If that should occur," Lestrade replied stiffly, "we shall deal with it." Holmes rose, placing his hands behind his back. "Very good. Then permit me to advise you, in your own interest, to keep a sharp eye upon Raman and company. For my part, I shall continue my investigations privately. When the truth emerges, as emerge it must, I trust you will not find yourself too far behind." Lestrade colored, half with irritation, half with embarrassment. "You always were fond of your riddles, Mr. Holmes. But if you discover anything tangible, you know where to find me." With that we departed. Pembroke, who had listened in dismay, turned to Holmes as we regained the street. "It seems hopeless, Mr. Holmes. If even Scotland Yard will not believe us." "On the contrary," Holmes interjected, "the inspector's disbelief is precisely what I anticipated. It leaves us free to act without interference. The Yard will come rushing in when the play is nearly over." My eyes. "And what do you infer?" "That Ramon's men carried a heavy load, the same load we observed, and that they have not yet ceased their traffic with the river. The game is afoot, Watson, though Lestrade will not see it. Let us therefore observe for ourselves." At Holmes' urging, Pembroke and I accompanied him to a small tavern that overlooked the wharf. From a window in its upper chamber we commanded a clear view of the warehouse and the river stairs. Holmes engaged the landlord with a few coins to grant us privacy, and there we stationed ourselves as twilight deepened. Hour after hour we watched. Dock workers came and went. Barges drifted through the fog. Lanterns flickered like will-o'-the-wisps. At last, near midnight, our patience was rewarded. A door opened in the side of the warehouse, and once more 2 figures emerged bearing a sack between them. By the wavering light of their lantern, I could discern that it was the same shape as before, long, rigid, and heavy. They descended the steps to a waiting skiff. Holmes's hand gripped my arm. "There, Watson, the play repeats itself. Do you mark the urgency of their movements? They fear discovery." We strained our eyes as the men rode into the darkness. Holmes, after a moment's thought, rose decisively. "Enough watching. Tomorrow, Watson, we act. There is a pattern here which I begin to perceive, though the picture is not yet complete. We shall have our truth, and Lestrade his evidence. But we must be swift, for I sense that the net is closing, and if we delay, the fish may slip through." Chapter 5. The Dockside Inquiry. Few scenes in London convey so vivid a sense of the city's ceaseless industry as the riverfront at dawn. The fog still clung low upon the Thames, yet already the quays were astir with men shouting, carts rumbling, and the dull thud of cargo slung upon wharves. The cries of gulls mingled with the hoarse calls of bargemen, and the air was pungent with tar, hemp, spices, and the rank odor of the river itself. It was into this tumult that Holmes led Pembroke and me on the morning following our midnight vigil. He strode with his habitual quickness, his keen eyes darting from warehouse to warehouse, as though he carried in his mind a map invisible to others. "Watson," said he, "the truth of a case lies not always with the great and mighty, but oftener in the mouths of common men. The river folk see everything. A shilling spent in the right quarter may yield more than a week of official inquiry. Pembroke, still pale from his restless nights, looked about him nervously. "But, Mr. Holmes, do you think it wise to question such men? They are rough fellows, and might not take kindly to our interest." Holmes gave a slight shrug. "We shall clothe our curiosity in the guise of idleness. Leave the talking to me." We began at a dockside tavern whose signboard proclaimed the Mermaid's Net. It was a low-ceilinged den, reeking of tobacco and stale ale, and filled with sailors of every nationality. Holmes, affecting the manner of a man with time to squander, ordered drinks for the company at the bar, and soon drew to himself a knot of willing talkers. I confess my amazement at the ease with which my friend slipped into the idioms of these rough mariners. He spoke of shipping routes, of cargoes, of tides and winds, as though he had spent his life before the mast. In less than half an hour he had gained their confidence, and scraps of information began to fall from their tongues. "Aye," said a grizzled tar with a scarred cheek, "there's queer doin's round Rahman's place, mark me. Men comin' and goin' at all hours, and never a word must sift carefully." Our next inquiry took us to a warehouse belonging to a rival merchant, one Mr. Blake, whose trade was chiefly in cotton. He was a stout Englishman with a florid face, who received us in his counting room with the air of one suspicious of intruders. Holmes, after a few courteous preliminaries, mentioned Rahman and Company and their dealings. At once Blake's eyes narrowed. "Rahman? Ha! A sly dog, sir, a sly dog. Undercuts honest traders with his foreign ways. I've long suspected he carries more than silks. His men are too close-mouthed by half. And yet, whenever I've spoken to the authorities, they've shrugged me off. Mark my words, there's villainy there." Holmes thanked him but pressed no further, and we withdrew. Outside, he remarked quietly, "Jealousy speaks as loudly as truth, Watson. Blake may be sincere, but he may also be moved by rivalry. We must weigh his words accordingly." As the day wore on, we visited several more establishments. Some knew nothing, others repeated rumors of smuggling, and a few spoke darkly of disappearances along the riverside. Night watchmen gone missing, or foreign sailors never seen again after entering certain alleys. By late afternoon, my feet were sore, my head spinning with contradictions. Holmes, however, seemed only the more animated, as though each conflicting account were a note in some vast symphony whose melody he alone perceived. At last we paused by the wharf where Rahman's warehouse loomed, its blank windows staring like blind eyes over the river. Holmes leaned upon the railing, gazing intently at the water where the tide lapped against the steps. "Consider, Watson," said he in a low tone, "what we have learned. Rahman imports silks, yes, but is suspected also of darker commerce. His men carry sacks by night to the river. A body was seen, then spirited away. Lestrade sees refuse, but I see a pattern. Goods arrive by ship, some are lawful, some not. Men who interfere, or who stumble upon secrets, vanish. What is more natural than that the river should become their grave?" Pembroke shuddered. "You mean to say, Mr. Holmes?" Confusion. To him it had woven a fabric whose pattern, though dim, was already discernible. As I closed my journal for the night, I felt once more the strange exhilaration that always accompanied our adventures. That sense of standing upon the brink of revelation, of being drawn into mysteries whose solution only Holmes could divine. Chapter 6. The Lodging House Secret. There are moments in an investigation when the grand outlines of a mystery give way to the humble details of everyday life. And it is there, among the modest folk and their lodgings, that Sherlock Holmes most often unearthed the decisive clue. Thus it was, on a drizzling afternoon, that we found ourselves threading the narrow courts behind Shadwell, where the warehouses gave way to mean streets of brick houses, their windows curtained in grime and their steps worn hollow by years of hard usage. Holmes had learned, from one of his discreet inquiries among dockside porters, that several of Rahman's men lodged in a house kept by a Mrs. Ellery, a widow of respectable character but straitened means. It was thither that we now bent our steps, Pembroke trailing nervously behind. The house stood in a crooked lane, its doorway framed by peeling paint, and a tangle of washing hung like limp flags between the upper windows. Holmes knocked smartly, and after a pause the door opened to reveal a woman of middle years, her face careworn but shrewd, with an apron knotted about her waist. "Mrs. Ellery?" Holmes inquired with that courteous gravity which so often disarmed the suspicious. "That's me, sir. What might you be wantin'?" Holmes introduced us as gentlemen engaged in private inquiries, and asked if she would permit a brief word concerning her lodgers. At the mention of Rahman's men, her eyes flickered uneasily, and she drew the door closer. "I don't know nothin' about their doings, sir. They pays their rent, and that's all I trouble myself with." Holmes's voice softened. "My dear madam, I assure you we seek not to embroil you in difficulty, but it touches upon a matter of life and death. A man has vanished, and there is reason to think your lodgers may hold some knowledge of it. You who see—" "Ellery, pray continue." "It was past midnight. I'd been kept awake by the toothache, and I went downstairs for a drop of gin to ease it. As I passed their room, I heard them talkin' in their lingo. Strange, guttural words. And then, plain as I hear my own voice, one of 'em says in English, 'He saw too much. The river will take him.'" Pembroke uttered a low exclamation. Mrs. Ellery nodded grimly. "I was that scared I near dropped where I stood. I crept back upstairs and said nothin'. What could I do? I'm a lone woman and they're strong men. But since then, I've not slept easy." Holmes's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "You have done wisely to confide in us. Your testimony is of great value. Tell me, have you observed anything they carry in or out?" She thought a moment. "Bundles, sir, now and then. Long, heavy bundles, what they handles careful. And the smell. Oh, sir, there's a queer smell about 'em sometimes, like spices gone rotten. It clings to the stair." Holmes made a note. "Excellent. One more question. Have they ever received visitors?" "Yes. A tall gent, dark hair, fine coat. He comes once a week, always at night. They treats him with respect, almost fear. I've heard them call him the Master." Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me. Here was, beyond doubt, a clue of the first importance. He rose, pressing a coin into her hand. "You have been of immense service, Mrs. Ellery. Fear nothing. We shall shield you from harm. For the present, speak to no one of this. Silence, in your case, is safety." She gave a nervous nod, and we took our leave. Once outside, Pembroke clutched Holmes' sleeve. "Good heavens, Holmes, that proves it beyond doubt. They murdered the man beneath the bridge." Holmes raised a finger. "It proves nothing, my dear sir, save that they speak of the river as their ally. Words are wind. Yet coupled with what we have observed, the inference strengthens. Still, I must see this master with my own eyes. Until then, all is conjecture." We walked. Witness fifth. The existence of a master, a figure of higher authority. Put these together, and what do we see? That a conspiracy exists, I answered, in which murder is used to guard some unlawful commerce. Holmes's eyes shone. Just so. And what commerce is this? That, Watson, is the very heart of it. We must strike quickly before another life is taken. At that moment, Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram. Holmes tore it open and read aloud. From Lestrade. Body of unknown man recovered near Rotherhithe. Come at once. L. Holmes' lips curved in a grim smile. So the river yields up its secret at last. Come, Watson. The game presses on. Chapter 7. The Silk Importer. The summons from Inspector Lestrade, abrupt though it was, did not divert Holmes from the path he had already marked. Indeed, he welcomed the discovery of the body as an inevitable confirmation of his deductions. Yet before we hurried to Rotherhithe, he determined upon one crucial step: a direct encounter with Mr. Rahman himself. It is time, said Holmes, as he tapped the telegram thoughtfully upon the mantelpiece, that we put a little pressure upon our friend, the importer of silks. The yard will have its corpse. We must learn what thread ties that corpse to Rahman's trade. If my conjectures hold, Watson, this silk merchant is less a dealer in fabrics than the visible edge of some darker tapestry. Thus, in the mid-afternoon, we made our way once more to Rahman and Company, Pembroke accompanying us, though his nerves were plainly frayed by the suspense. The fog had thinned somewhat, revealing the river in its sluggish breadth, dotted with barges and steamers. Yet the air retained that heavy, sooty tang peculiar to London's waterside. The warehouse door admitted us into a world of exotic color and texture. Rolls of silk, glimmering with strange hues, were piled upon racks. Bales bound with rope exhaled faint odors of spices and eastern dust. Clerks moved noiselessly between tall ledgers. "What knows?" "Curious," he murmured. "You detected too, Watson? That faint odor, coal dust mingled with spice." I bent to sniff and indeed caught a trace of something acrid, overlying the perfume of the cloth. Rahman's face remained composed, yet his hands tightened imperceptibly upon the desk. "The voyage from the east is long, Mr. Holmes. Many odors cling to the cargo. Surely that is unremarkable." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Unremarkable, perhaps, were it not that the same scent pervades the stair of Mrs. Ellery's lodging house, where 4 of your men reside. A coincidence, no doubt, yet coincidences, when repeated, form chains." For the first time, Rahman's composure wavered. His gaze flicked from Holmes to Pembroke, who stood stiffly at my side, and back again. "I do not know what you imply, sir. My business is lawful. If my men choose their lodgings unwisely, I cannot be blamed." Holmes smiled thinly. "No blame, assuredly. But you will forgive me if I inquire further. There is talk, Mr. Rahman, of certain bundles conveyed at night to the river. Bundles long and heavy, borne by 2 men. Bundles with a most inconvenient resemblance to the human form." A muscle twitched in Rahman's cheek. For a heartbeat the room seemed to still, save for the ticking of a clock upon the wall. Then he recovered himself with a laugh that rang hollow. "London is full of tales, Mr. Holmes. Dockside tongues wag. I trade in silks, nothing more. If men whisper otherwise, that is envy." Holmes leaned across the desk, his voice low and cutting. "And if I tell you, sir, that a body has this very morning been recovered from the Thames, weighted and bound, its garments torn, yet bearing a trace of this same fabric. Would you still speak of envy? Raman's lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes flashed, then narrowed. At length he said coldly, "I know nothing of it." Holmes straightened. "So you say. Yet I perceive, in your silence, more than you intend. Perhaps, who cloaks his dealings in the respectability of Raman's trade. That is the figure we must unmask. And when we do, the whole edifice will tumble." We repaired at once to Rotherhithe, where Lestrade awaited us by the river's edge. The inspector greeted Holmes with his usual brusqueness, but there was a gleam of satisfaction in his eye. "Well, Mr. Holmes, here's your body at last. Perhaps now you'll admit the yard was not so blind after all." The corpse, laid out upon the stones beneath a tarpaulin, was that of a man in early middle age, his features swollen by immersion, but still recognizable. His hands bore the calluses of labor. His garments, though torn, had once been of decent cloth. Around the ankles clung fragments of rope, and upon his sleeve I observed a shred of silk. Holmes bent over the body, his gaze intent. With delicate fingers he lifted the silk, holding it to the light. "The same weave," he whispered. "Note the fraying, Watson. Torn, not cut." This man struggled. "And observe here, the faint black dust upon his cuff." "Coal again," Lestrade sniffed. "All very clever, but it proves little. Who is he? That's the question." "A waterman, perhaps," said Holmes. "Look at the muscles of the forearm, the breadth of the shoulders. He rode for his living. Let us inquire among the lightermen of the district." And indeed, after some questioning, a boatman came forward who identified the corpse as Thomas Lewis, a fellow waterman who had vanished 3 nights before. Holmes's eyes gleamed. 3 nights. The very night Pembroke saw the body beneath the bridge. Then Lewis was the witness, Watson. He stumbled upon their nocturnal labors, and for that he was silenced. Lestrade scowled. "A pretty tale, Holmes, but I need more than guesses. Who killed him? Where's your evidence?" Holmes only smiled. "Patience, Inspector. The river yields its secrets slowly. But we are closer than you think. Come, Watson. There is more to be done." As we left, Pembroke whispered to me in awe. Holmes unravels it as though he had seen it happen before his very eyes. Bones. Holmes was already awake when I rose, seated cross-legged in his dressing gown upon the hearthrug, his long fingers interlaced and his gaze fixed in abstract meditation upon the glowing embers. "You will forgive me, Watson," he said without looking up, "if I appear to have spent the night in idleness. In truth, my brain has been busily sifting threads of silk, of coal dust, of fear and of silence. They form a web, my dear fellow, a web most cunningly woven. Today, we shall test its strength." We breakfasted hastily, Holmes declining more than a few mouthfuls of bread, and were soon conveyed by cab to the wharves where Raman's warehouse crouched like some exotic beast amid the soot-stained brickwork of the Thames-side buildings. The day promised confrontation. Holmes's manner had that electric keenness which always presaged some decisive move. Lestrade awaited us there, his bulldog face wearing a look of weary suspicion. He tugged irritably at his whiskers as Holmes greeted him with exaggerated cheer. "Inspector, I trust your men are prepared to lend us their assistance." "They're standing by," Lestrade grunted. "But I hope to heaven this won't be another of your wild goose chases. I've 3 constables off sick and no patience for riddles." Holmes's lips twitched. "No riddles, my dear Lestrade. Only facts." Permit me to summon Mr. Rahman and his associates for a little parley. Each shall tell his tale, and we shall see whether the strands hold or fray." Thus it was that within the gloomy confines of Rahman's warehouse office, we gathered a curious company. Rahman himself, pale but defiant. Two of his stevedores, heavy-shouldered men with downcast eyes. Mrs. Ellery, drawn and anxious, wringing her hands in her shawl. And Pembroke, pale with excitement, who insisted upon attending despite Holmes' warning that it might try his nerves. Holmes stood at the center, his presence dominating the chamber. He began softly, almost conversationally. "Let us suppose, gentlemen, that a man, say a waterman of Rotherhithe, were to stumble upon some unusual licked his lips. She will." Holmes's brows rose. "So certain. Admirable devotion. Yet I observe on your boots a residue of tar mixed with coal dust, not older than a day or two. Such a blend is common upon the lightermen's barges, but hardly upon a parlor floor." A murmur passed among those present. The stevedore shifted uncomfortably but said no more. Holmes wheeled upon Mrs. Ellery. "And you, madam, your lodgers speak of a visitor, a man who comes cloaked at midnight, tall and well-spoken. The master, they call him. Did you see him?" Her lips trembled. I keep to my room, sir. I hear voices, yes, footsteps upon the stair. But I never look, I swear it." Holmes bent closer, his voice dropping to a purr. "Yet you know more than you admit. Your fear betrays you. This master, he pays you, does he not? Pays you handsomely to ask no questions." She buried her face in her hands and sobbed softly. Holmes straightened, addressing us all. "A web of alibis, you see, each thread delicate, yet each strained by the weight of truth. Pembroke, mark how they quiver when touched." Pembroke leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Then you believe Rahman guilty, Holmes?" "Guilt is a heavy word," Holmes replied. "But deception, that is plain. The silk upon Lewis' sleeve ties him to this trade, the coal dust to these barges, and yet all profess innocence. Very well, let us test them further." He drew from his pocket a small scrap of cloth, the shred taken from the corpse's garment. "Behold, the final link. This silk torn in struggle is of your own weave, Mr. Rahman. Do you deny it?" Rahman's nostrils flared. For a moment he seemed about to speak, then checked himself. "Many importers deal in silk. That proves nothing." Holmes's eyes glittered. "True. Yet not all importers have 4 men lodged in Mrs. Ellery's house, nor shutters that open at midnight, nor a master who comes cloaked in secrecy. Too much. They bound him in silk, weighted him with coal, and consigned him to the Thames. Yet silk and coal both betray them. It is always so. The very tools of concealment serve to reveal, and behind them moves the master, weaving his design. Who profits by these midnight cargoes? Who has the means to command Rahman? Who possesses both wealth and respectability enough to mask such commerce? I ventured a guess, but he only shook his head. "No, Watson. Let us not mar the beauty of the puzzle by forcing the pieces. Tomorrow night, by the river, we shall see the pattern complete." And so the day closed upon a note of foreboding, as though all London held its breath. The fog rolled in again, wrapping the city in its clammy embrace, and the bells of St. Paul's tolled mournfully across the sleeping Thames. Somewhere in that darkness a master waited, secure in his secrecy, yet Holmes, ever relentless, prepared to tear the veil aside. Chapter 9. The Trap by the River. The evening upon which Holmes resolved to spring his trap was one of those peculiar nights that seemed designed by nature herself to lend aid to clandestine enterprise. The fog lay thick upon the Thames, coiling about the masts of anchored ships like ghostly serpents, muffling the creak of timbers and the slap of the tide against the embankments. Lamps along the wharf glowed faintly, mere smudges of yellow drowning in a sea of gray. The very air smelt of secrecy, a pungent mixture of coal smoke, tar, and damp stone. Holmes was in high spirits as we prepared ourselves at Baker Street. His violin lay untouched upon its stand, yet the sparkle in his eyes was akin to the fire I had often seen when he had mastered some particularly knotty problem. He moved about the room with swift, decisive gestures, adjusting his revolver, pocketing a coil of thin but strong rope, and inspecting a small vial of clear liquid which he held up to the lamplight. "Chloroform, Watson," he explained at my questioning glance. "One never knows when persuasion may fail, and I have no intention of allowing our quarry to slip the net at the last moment." I could not help but feel chuckled softly, his eyes fixed on the darkened city that passed us by. We reached the wharf at midnight. The tide lapped hungrily at the piles. The warehouses loomed above us, their black windows like watchful eyes. Holmes led us along a narrow alley between stacks of crates until we reached a vantage point overlooking Rahman's warehouse and the small jetty beyond. "Here," he whispered, crouching low behind a pile of timber. "We wait. They will come, and when they do, we must be swift." The minutes crept by with agonizing slowness. The damp penetrated my very marrow, and the silence was broken only by the distant tolling of a bell and the occasional flap of a night-bird's wings. Beside me, Holmes remained motionless, his keen profile etched against the faint glow of the mist. He seemed scarcely to breathe, so absolute was his concentration. At last, faint footsteps echoed upon the cobbles. From the gloom emerged two figures, the stevedores we had questioned earlier. They bore between them a long, heavy bundle wrapped in canvas and bound with rope. My heart quickened as I recalled Pembroke's description of what he had glimpsed beneath the bridge. The men approached the jetty, pausing to glance furtively about them. Then, from the shadows of the warehouse door, another figure stepped forth. A tall man, cloaked and hat-brim pulled low. His posture exuded command. His mere presence stilled the movements of the others. "The master," Holmes breathed into my ear. We watched as the bundle was lowered to the edge of the jetty. The cloaked figure stooped, examining the knots with a practiced hand, then straightened and gestured sharply toward the river. It was at that instant Holmes sprang from concealment with the suddenness of a striking hawk. "Hold there," he cried, his voice cutting through the fog like a trumpet. "In the name of the law." The scene erupted into chaos. The stevedores dropped their burden and lunged for escape, only to be seized by Lestrade's men. The cloaked figure recoiled, then darted toward the warehouse. Holmes was upon him in an instant, his lean frame moving. "Harrowby, Member of Parliament, patron of commerce, and, as it seems, orchestrator of nocturnal enterprises unfit for daylight." Sir Reginald's lips curled in disdain. "You meddlesome fool. Do you imagine you can prove anything? Who will take the word of a consulting detective against mine?" Holmes's smile was thin as a knife. "Proof? You are mistaken, Sir Reginald. The river itself bears witness. The corpse of Thomas Lewes will speak against you. The silk upon his sleeve will condemn you. And your own men, eager to save themselves, will tell the tale. The web you spun has become your snare. Sir Reginald lunged suddenly, striking at Holmes' arm. The revolver clattered to the ground, and the two men grappled fiercely. I rushed forward, but before I could intervene, Holmes twisted with the supple strength of a fencer, bringing his adversary crashing to the cobblestones. With a swift motion, he uncorked the vial of chloroform and pressed it to the man's face. A muffled cry, a moment's struggle, and Sir Reginald lay senseless. Lestrade arrived breathless, his men dragging the captured stevedores behind him. His eyes widened as he recognized the unconscious figure at Holmes's feet. "Good Lord above," he exclaimed. "Harrowby, a member of Parliament." "Holmes, if this is true—" "It is true, Inspector," Holmes interrupted coolly. "You may bind him and convey him to the yard. I shall present the evidence in due course. Tonight we have plucked the spider from his web." The remainder of the night passed in a blur of activity. The bundle was opened to reveal not a corpse this time, but bales of contraband, silks and jewels smuggled through the river, avoiding the tariffs of Her Majesty's customs. It was the corpse of Lewes, poor soul, that had earlier betrayed the game. He had been slain when chance delivered him witness to one of these clandestine transfers. By dawn, the first streaks of pale light glimmered upon the river. Holmes and I stood upon the jetty, weary yet exhilarated, as the police cart bore away Sir Reginald and his men at the genius of my companion. Holmes had indeed spun a trap by the river, and in that trap the master of the web had been caught fast. Chapter 10. Truth at Dawn. The gray light of dawn crept over London as Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, weary from the night's exertions but animated by the events we had witnessed. A faint drizzle had begun to fall, casting a sheen upon the cobbles and drumming softly upon the hansom's roof. The river, that dark accomplice of the crime, now gleamed in the early light like a sheet of tarnished silver, its secrets laid bare at last. Inside the familiar sitting room of 221B, Holmes cast aside his cloak and sank into his chair with the air of a man who has completed a great labor. He struck a match, set his pipe glowing, and allowed the fragrant smoke to curl lazily toward the ceiling. I, ever his chronicler, drew forth my notebook, eager to set in order the tangled skein that had so marvelously unraveled before our eyes. Holmes observed my preparations with a smile. "Ah, Watson, faithful Boswell that you are. I perceive your pen is restless to capture the tale. Very well. Let us reconstruct the matter, so that the sequence may be as clear in your narrative as it was in my mind." I leaned forward, pen poised. "Begin, Holmes, from the start. For though I have shared every step of the adventure, I confess that certain links remain obscure." He tapped the bowl of his pipe thoughtfully. "It began, you will recall, with Pembroke's vision of a corpse beneath the London Bridge. The Yard dismissed it as fancy, but I knew at once there was substance in his terror. Why? Because such hallucinations are rarely conjured in so precise a form. The detail of the silk, the outline of the weighted body. These spoke of reality glimpsed, not imagination. "And the silk itself?" I prompted. "Precisely. That fragment was the first thread. Smyrna weave, uncommon in London, yet present in Ramon's warehouse. When you detected, as I did, the faint odor of coal dust mingled with spice, the picture grew clearer. A warehouse fray under pressure, Watson. Did you note how one stevedore insisted his wife could swear to his presence? Too eager, too rehearsed, and his boots betrayed him. Yes, I remember, said I. The tar and coal dust. Exactly. The river leaves its mark. Thus the net drew tighter. But the question remained, who was the master? Rahman, though guilty of complicity, lacked the stature to orchestrate such a scheme. Only a man of influence could shield the operation from scrutiny, ensuring that cargoes passed unchecked and suspicions were allayed. Sir Reginald Harrowby, with his position in Parliament and his connections among the merchants, was the natural choice. When we observed the cloaked figure, his bearing and authority betrayed him before his face did. I could not suppress a shudder at the recollection of that night. And it was the trap by the river that confirmed all. Holmes inclined his head. Yes. By forcing them into action, we compelled them to expose themselves. The bales of contraband replaced the corpse this time, but the pattern was the same. Weighted bundles, smuggled under cover of fog. The very repetition of the act condemned them. Criminals often imagine that changing the contents alters the crime, but the method remains constant. Lewis' fate was not an aberration. It was an inevitability. Lestrade arrived later that morning, still flushed with the excitement of so notable an arrest. He perched awkwardly upon the edge of our settee, dabbing his brow with a handkerchief. "Well, Mr. Holmes," he said, "I'll not deny it. You've bested us soundly this time. To think a member of Parliament at the heart of such villainy. Why, the papers will have a field day. I dare say Scotland Yard shall receive some measure of credit, though between you and me, I know well enough where the credit belongs." Holmes waved the compliment aside. "I seek no credit, Inspector. The satisfaction lies in the logic of the thing, the unraveling of the web. Yet you will do well to ensure that Rahman and his men speak freely. They will surely seek leniency. And in thought of Pembroke, whose innocent errand had drawn us into this web, and of Lewis, whose honest labor had cost him his life. Against these humble men had stood a figure of authority, secure in wealth and status. Without Holmes, the balance might never have been righted. That evening, as the rain ceased and the fog lifted at last, I walked with Holmes along the embankment. The river flowed dark and silent beside us, its surface rippling with the reflection of the lamps. "London is a curious place, Watson," Holmes remarked. "Beneath its splendor runs an undercurrent as foul as the river mud. Yet, it is ever thus with civilization. The brighter the lamps, the deeper the shadows. Our task is not to banish the shadows, that were impossible, but to illuminate them where we may, and to remind the world that justice, though sometimes delayed, yet prevails." I looked upon my friend, his gaunt features softened by the glow of the lamplight, and marveled anew at the strange mixture of intellect and morality that drove him. To the world he was a consulting detective, a man of cold logic and piercing observation. Yet I, who knew him best, discerned beneath the icy exterior a fire of conviction, a belief that truth itself was worth any struggle. Thus ended the affair of the murder beneath the London Bridge. The city soon buzzed with the scandal of Harrowby's arrest, and the case was debated in every club and coffee house. But, for Holmes, the matter was concluded the moment the logic was complete, the deductions verified. He turned at once to new problems, new enigmas. leaving me to set down the tale for those who, like myself, found in his work both fascination and inspiration. And so I close this account with gratitude for the privilege of having witnessed genius at its work, and for the reminder, amid the fog and shadows of London, that there yet walked among us one man who sought the light.